I'm making a calm open world exploration game, and now that most of the base mechanics have been implemented, I want to start expanding the open world. Right now, all I've got is the small starting island, which I was also using for testing. I'm gonna keep this island, but I want to add many more small islands and a big main island with a small town. So the way landscapes work in Unreal Engine is using a landscape actor, which as you can see is currently not much bigger than the starting island. Luckily, the landscape is made out of tiles, so I can just add tiles where I want to add islands and stuff. Okay, so adding tiles completely ruins the existing landscape. The reason for this is that, as you may remember if you've watched my previous devlogs, I'm using height map stamps to create the landscape, not sculpting it directly. This wasn't written anywhere, but apparently the system does not support changing the bounds of the landscape, as this will mess up the render target containing the height data. I spent about 3 full days looking through the code and trying to find a solution for this problem, but in the end I had to cut my losses. So now I will for sure have to completely remake the first island, but I don't want to use stamps again because they're just really buggy. Instead, I'll be using landscape splines. Landscape splines allow you to create the shape of a mountain or valley with a spline and then set the angle. I'm not gonna make the same mistake twice, so I spent a bunch of time testing the system in different circumstances to make sure it's future-proof. One big problem I found is that the noise textures are mapped based on the bounds of the landscape. I couldn't fix this, so unfortunately I'll have to work around it by expanding just the edges of the landscape to make the bounds very big. That way I can later expand the landscape without having to worry too much about the noise or the bounds. With all of those annoying issues out of the way, I can finally expand the landscape. First, I took a top-down screenshot and started roughly drawing the shape of the islands in Krita. The sketch is done, so I can start using splines to make the islands. This is also when I quickly realized 16GB RAM is not enough to edit such a large landscape, so I had to upgrade my RAM to keep Unreal Engine from crashing every 5 minutes, not exaggerating. When I finally got the shape of the islands looking good, I painted the landscape layers and started adding the forests using the PCG system. I want the town to be in a very big tree at the top of the island, so as a placeholder for where the town will be, I added a tree from one of the Quixel tree packs and simply scaled it way up. The shape of the mountain is good, but it looks awful because it's all just grass, so I added some code to the landscape material to make the steep parts look rocky. I took another screenshot and started drawing the paths, cliffs and various points of interest, which I won't show to not spoil the entire map. The lake was pretty easy to add using the ocean and lake system I made in Devlog 2. Paths may sound simple, but there are actually 3 steps in creating one. First, sculpt the landscape to fit the path. Then, paint the landscape layer to path to make it a different material. And finally, mask all the trees to prevent them from spawning in the middle of a path. I hate repetitive tasks, so I decided to create one blueprint that does all 3 for me. Now all I need to do is position one spline how I want and it'll do everything else for me. This also means that should I want to edit a path, it will be a much less painful process. I started trying to make a cliff by hand, but quickly realized this would take way too much time. So I made a blueprint that creates a cliff wall along a spline at a certain height and angle. Now there's another big problem. Some of these cliffs need to gradually get smaller and not go all the way around the island. So how do I blend a 90-degree drop in the landscape with the rest? The best way I found was to use brushes and try my best to blend this into the rest of the landscape without leaving any harsh seams. Finally, I want to improve the underwater environment by making the procedural generation code more complex and adding more types of underwater foliage. But first, I want to just mask the underwater rocks based on the height of the landscape. This way I don't need to mask islands out myself. These rocks, along with the foliage on top of them, perform well in game with distance scrolling and LODs, but unfortunately generating more than about 100 square meters of them crashes my PC. So I had to basically partition them by adding a bunch of smaller PCG actors. This is pretty annoying to work with since I have to enable and disable them one by one, but what are you gonna do? Now on to the underwater improvements you'll see in-game. I made 4 new foliage types, 2 types of normal coral and 2 types of what I call coral plates, because I just couldn't find the name of these things. So after some texturing and simple material coding, they're ready to add. This is pretty simple, I just have to make the coral spawn on top of the rocks and the plates on the sides. This is good, but it can be better. The problem is that everything is spawned completely randomly, meaning you basically have everything everywhere. In real life, trees and underwater foliage grow more in clusters. I also think this would look better, so I want to add it to my system. To do this, I'm making it so each rock has more chance of spawning foliage of a certain kind, so you could have one rock covered in one type of coral and another in a second type of coral. Alright, I'm pretty happy with that, and these coral plates also look pretty cool at night. I still have a lot to add, caves, wreckage, quests and more, but that's it for now. I hope you liked the video. If the game interests you, consider wishlisting it on Steam. You can also join the Discord or subscribe. Bye.